Good morning, my friends, and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship at Stony Brook. Happy Mother's Day to all, a day first created by Unitarian Julia Ward Howe as a social justice call for peace. My name is Maureen Shaman, and I am thrilled to be your worship associate this morning, along with a minister and dear friend of mine for over 40 years, the Reverend Ben Bortin. Reverend Bortin served as minister of the First UU Church of Duluth, Minnesota for 8 years, where he and I first met when I was 10 years old, and no, there never was a second UU church in Duluth. He was also minister at the UU Church of Staten Island for 21 years, a graduate of the University of California and Starr King School of Religious Leadership. He also served 12 years as membership coordinator at the UU congregation at Shelter Rock, here on Long Island. He taught Religions of the World at St. John's University and for 2 terms served as president of the UU United Nations office, which is so cool. I didn't know that. He is currently a chaplain at Zucker Hillside Hospital in Queens, New York, and resides in Port Washington with his wife, Andrea Starr. Our Director of Religious Education is Deb Little. For information about our in-person religious education class schedule and how to contact Deb, please see our website at UUFSB.org. A very special welcome to any of you who are here with us for the first or second time today, and I hope that you find among us inspiration for living and nourishment for your spirit. We are glad to have you here with us, and since our services do vary each week, we hope that you will return often to really get to know us as a community of faith. Unitarian Universalism, as a living tradition, is committed to freedom of belief and oriented toward inclusion, interdependence, and justice. You can find additional information about the principles we strive to live by on our webpage. We are a congregation of seekers who have come from a variety of faith traditions, and we welcome those of all ages, abilities, and identities who are searching for a spiritual home. If you are attending this service virtually, please watch the chat for the order of service and a few important links during the service, especially the visitors form and feedback form. We would love to hear from you. After the service, you can leave this virtual space, go to our webpage, and click the link for small group chats in order to visit with a smaller group of friendly people. I have just 2 fascinating announcements to share with you this morning. First, as you may know, the COMC spent last year and most of this year researching, discussing, and drafting a covenant of right relations for our congregation. Our fellowship will vote on whether or not to adopt this covenant at our annual meeting on June 5th. So be there or be square. Copies of the covenant are available for your review throughout the sanctuary. Please contact the members of the COMC with any questions. Their email addresses can be found at the bottom of each copy of the covenant. So take that and read it. And second, our fantastic, fabulous UUFSB goods and services auction is back and fast approaching. Woo! It's called T for Two. This year, it's comprised of 2 events. Our silent auction will be online and run from May 14th to the 20th, and our live auction is in person on Saturday afternoon, not evening this time, afternoon, May 21st. Tickets are now on sale for the live auction, so you can see Deborah and Colleen. Could you raise your hand? Colleen's here. I don't see Deborah. At the back of the sanctuary after the service to buy your tickets. Only $15 per adult and $5 per child. We just ask, please, families with children, can you please purchase your tickets by next Sunday, May 15th, so that we can plan accordingly. Thanks so much. Let us enter now into the sacred space of worship with the sounding of the morning bell. Please remain silent until the sound of the bell can no longer be heard. If you are at home, you may wish to light your own candle as we light our chalice. I have asked one of our honored guests this morning, Andrea Starr, to light the chalice as I read this chalice lighting by Rebecca Savage, The Promise and the Practice. We light our flaming chalice as a beloved people, united in love and thirsting for restorative justice. May it melt away the tethers that uphold whiteness in our midst. May it spark in us a spirit of humility. May it ignite in us radical love that transforms our energy into purposeful action. This is a chalice of audacious hope. This chalice shines a light on our shared past, signaling our intention to listen deeply, reflect wisely, and move boldly toward our highest ideals. Thank you, Andrea. We are currently in the midst of our annual pledge drive, which funds our existence for the whole year. Every year, we ask several people to tell us what the fellowship means to them and how they decide to pledge. So Marie Baltz is coming right now to offer us a UU Pledge Drive Minute.
Good morning and happy Mother's Day to all the mothers. The last time I gave a UU Minute was during a time of split sessions. The Budget Drive Committee asked everyone to be succinct. I rehearsed and delivered mine in 1 minute. I could not find it, so this is going to be longer than a minute. I joined the UUFSB in September of 1980. It was an auspicious start. I met wonderful people, some of whom remain friends to this day. My son met his lifelong best friend. We joined 3 weeks later. I knew this was where I belonged. This was love at first sight. My journey to the UUFSB began when I was 9 years old. I was when I was a good Roman Catholic. I learned, to my dismay, that women could not become priests. At 17, I was done with religion. Then I had children. My first requirement of any new religion was the ordination of women. When my 6-year-old son asked why we did not go to church on Sunday, as all of his friends did, I researched UUism, and I spoke to Linda Volkers at length. Well, any religion that welcomes atheists and has a long, proud journey of fighting for social justice cannot be all bad. My younger son started in the RE at age 5. My husband Tony and I agreed that the RE program was really valuable for our children. The program cemented our commitment. Tony joined the fellowship in 1986. He then joined the search committee for our first called minister. Since joining the fellowship, I have worn many hats, including service as president of the board and serving on many committees. I am currently active on the membership committee, and since 2013, the pastoral assistants. In 2012, I had a back incident that left me paralyzed before my surgery 5 months later. The PAs and the whole fellowship stepped up for me and Tony. They delivered meals, ran errands, and offered practical and emotional support. After I recovered, I joined the PAs. Whatever I gave to the fellowship, I received back many times over. We began pledging soon after we joined, but it was Andy Hall in 1985 who convinced us we needed to up our pledge. We were planning to call a minister, and we doubled our pledge, and we have increased our pledge every year, often substantially. We celebrated the life of Andy's wife, Edith, yesterday. At that time, the Pledge Committee asked for 2% of our taxable income. Since then, we have asked more. There's no home like this, and we must all do our part for our home to continue and prosper. Please pledge generously so our home will be here now and for others in the future. Thank you.
crowded the floor. Awfully different without you. Don't get around much anymore. Thought I'd visit the club. Got as far as the door. I couldn't bear it without you. Don't get around much anymore. Darling, I guess my mind's more at ease. But nevertheless, I stir up memories. Been invited on dates. Might have gone, but what for? Couldn't bear it without you. Don't get around much anymore.
Inspired by what we have just heard, let us work to cultivate boundless goodwill. Let us not deceive one another, nor wish others harm, but attempt to radiate friendliness over the whole world, above, below, and all around, without limit.
We work to be respectful and not to use ableist language that calls everyone to run or walk when many are not able to. The language in our hymn, 348, Guide My Feet While I Run This Race, is metaphorical and biblical. Darnell St. Romain, a liturgical music director and hymnologist, says of this hymn, quote, "The author of the letter to the Hebrews compared the Christian life to running a race. In this race, one puts aside everything that might hinder, namely sin. While running, one looks to Jesus, who endured the cross. Enslaved Africans knew shame and hostility, the lash and the whip. In the end, they too would identify with Jesus, who had gone where they hoped to be. The hymn is a traditional African American spiritual, a song of encouragement to those escaping captivity and running toward freedom." End of quote. It was also used in the civil rights movement to encourage persistence in the hard work. Let it call us, if we are people of color, to be sustained and keep resisting, and if we are white, to do the hard work of dismantling white supremacy from within. Please stand in body or spirit and sing with gusto, along with our fantastic musicians.
We're going to start this one out a cappella, so you have to sing. Guide my feet while I run this race. Guide my feet while I run this race. Guide my feet while I run this race, 'cause I don't want to run this race alone.
There are several Langston Hughes in our hymnal, and the following is one of them. In time of silver rain is appropriate because we seem to be in a time of silver rain, although not today. But this one is 545 in the hymnal, if you care to look at it. In time of silver rain, the earth puts new life again. Green grasses grow and flowers lift their heads. And over all the plain, the wonder spreads of life, of life, of life. In time of silver rain, the butterflies lift silken wings to catch a rainbow cry, and trees put forth new leaves to sing in joy beneath the sky, when spring and life are new. If you would join me, please, in a minute or slightly more of silence, we will then join together in hymn number 123, Spirit of Life. A few moments of silence. To hymn number 123, Spirit of Life. It is a great delight to be with you this morning, and thank you, Maureen, for that most gracious introduction and welcome. It is a true thrill for me to be back with Maureen Shaman, and as she mentioned, that is in no small part because when I first met her, she was a little girl, a very precocious, intelligent girl, and someone who, captured my heart. And here we are. That was Duluth, Minnesota, of which we had we had a grand time. It even with winter lasting a while. But here we are, Stony Brook, Long Island, and it's just great. I also wish to thank for their wonderful participation in this service, the musicians this morning, Steve Salerno, Keenan Zach, Dan Weymouth. It has been very moving, and I really appreciate all that you've invested, your heart and soul. And I had a preview. I also am very moved by the vocalist whom we will be hearing from in a little while, Claudia Jacobs. My thanks to her as well. I also want to give a little shout out, not so little, to our sound specialist, Rich Little. I appreciate his going over a bit the ins and outs of this microphone, this sound system. And if anyone has any difficulty hearing, especially poetry, music, just don't hesitate to raise your hand a little bit. It reminds me, though, of that story of the Episcopal priest who didn't have the blessing of so much astute sound technical advice and wasn't even sure if the microphone were functioning. And you know, in the Episcopal liturgy, the officiant says, "The Lord be with you," and the congregation responds, "And also with you." Well, this priest, rapping on the pulpit a little bit, said, I think there is something wrong with the microphone. And the congregation answered, "And also with you." Nothing wrong with the microphone or with you here. I've always been impressed with a statement by the late Reverend John Haynes Holmes, Unitarian minister in New York City in the early 1900s, who got in trouble with the denomination over his opposition to our country's involvement in World War I. And kudos to him for his position. World War I was called the most colossal mismanaged butchery in human history by the likes of Ernest Hemingway. But John Haynes Holmes famously said, "When I say the word God, it is poetry, not theology. Nothing that any theologian has written about God has helped me much. But everything the poets have written about flowers and birds and skies and seas and saviors of the race and God, whoever that may be, has at one time or another reached my soul. The theologians gather dust upon the shelves, but the poets are stained with my fingers and blotted with my tears." Poetry, when it does reach us, conveys spirituality. What is poetry? "What oft is thought and ne'er so well expressed," said Alexander Pope. Some of the most eloquently expressed prose can be described as poetic, whether it be Lincoln's second inaugural address or Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s "I Have a Dream" or mountaintop orations. Poetry is thought, but it is also feeling and rhythm and spirit. It is sometimes described as the middle ground between language and music. It can be not strictly grammatical or rational, but speak to deeper human realities by being jagged and intuitive and dreamlike. Langston Hughes, the Black Poet Laureate of the United States for the 20th century, was encountered by me for the first time in my 8th grade class. There was a short excerpt of a poem we'll hear today, and I believe the only selection in that textbook by an African American, which would be one more than there were African Americans in my classroom. The towns of Concord, Walnut Creek, California, suburbs of San Francisco where I grew up, were de facto racially segregated, as they more or less still are. I was just there last week, as is so much of the United States, lamentably, to this day. I didn't read or think about Langston Hughes again for a number of years. Now, the more I learn about him, the more I admire him. I am so delighted, again, that the poems of his that I share will be read to jazz accompaniment, because that was a way that Langston Hughes, when he delivered readings, liked to do so, with a jazz backdrop. And furthermore, he went to nightclubs to write his poems to jazz backdrop, and it's especially appropriate that we opened with a selection of Duke Ellington. That was a particular favorite of Langston Hughes, and he once said he wanted his doorbell chime to be Duke Ellington. Maybe today he would say his ringtone on his phone. Langston Hughes had an uncommon poetic gift such that even by the time he was in the 8th grade, he was voted class poet. And in my view, he was a seer, not so much that he could see into the future, as that he could see deeply into the present. He could capture a human reality with uncommon, pulsating vividness. Listen to this description, for example, of a twilight scene on his train trip to Mexico, en route to visiting his father. Langston Hughes was still an adolescent. It is sunset, and Mexico's great jagged mountains are bathed in yellow wine. There are some old peaks in the background that have wrapped a purple veil about themselves and sit huddled like Indians. Langston Hughes was born in 1902 in Joplin, Missouri. At that time, Teddy Roosevelt was president and had invited Booker T. Washington to the White House, which scandalized much of the public and the press in this country, especially in the South. Langston Hughes' own ancestry was notable. His grandfather, Lewis Leary, was killed in John Brown's raid at Harper's Ferry. His other grandfather, his namesake Charles Langston, participated in forcibly preventing a fugitive slave from being returned to bondage in 1858. And his great-uncle, John Langston, was the first black American to hold office in this country as a result of a popular vote, eventually becoming a congressperson from Virginia. Langston Hughes' grandmother told young Langston about these heroic relatives, but at the same time, Langston did not feel any particular warmth from his grandmother emotionally, nor from his mother, nor from his father. Langston's father in particular was a very irritable man, given to denigrating African Americans, even though he himself was one. Left home fairly early in Langston's childhood to set his fortune in Mexico, and probably that was the greatest gift he could have given Langston Hughes. It was not a pleasure to be around him. But Langston's mother had her own way of being remote to him. So in a way, he grew up a motherless, fatherless, grandmotherless child. And on that note, many people are in that predicament nonetheless. Happy Mother's Day. What he did come to love early were books. His most favorite place in the world was the Topeka, Kansas Public Library. And at a young age, he read Uncle Tom's Cabin, Huckleberry Finn, W.E.B. Du Bois' 1903 classic, The Souls of Black Folk. One afternoon, as he was dreamily reading, he heard some boys playing outside, and he felt a little guilty and a little deprived, wondering if he were too bookish. He more or less remedied that by becoming a track star in high school. But there is one respect which surprised me and where I particularly identify with Langston Hughes, and that is in the area of religion. Langston Hughes had an aunt who actually poured more love and affection toward him, her nephew, than did his parents and grandmother, which wouldn't be that difficult. She also was a deeply devout evangelical Christian, sometimes spending entire days at church. She took young Langston to a Christian revival, one where adults and children were expected eventually to testify publicly in, as they put it, their personal faith in Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior. One by one, people did so, until it got to the point that there was one person left. Yes, young Langston Hughes. Eyes were on him, people urging him to come on, and finally, under that kind of pressure, he spoke the desired words, and everyone erupted in jubilation. But that night, Langston Hughes began uncontrollably crying. His aunt came into his bedroom and gently reassured him that was a natural emotional response to this great momentous experience he had just had of being saved. That was not the reason that Langston Hughes was crying. He was profoundly upset that he had misrepresented himself. He did not feel, quote unquote, that Jesus had entered his life as personal Lord and Savior. He felt the teachings eventually of Jesus were very admirable, but he could never identify through his life with that approach that was taken at that revival. And yet he felt spirituality and communicated it. A word of background about the poem that he created when he was still a teenager. The Negro Speaks of Rivers. It's also in our hymnal. Langston Hughes was aware that human civilization started near rivers, whether it was the Nile in Egypt, the Tigris, Euphrates in Mesopotamia, the Indus in India, the Yangtze in China. And he didn't know, but I learned later, also the Virgin River in Utah, where Pueblo Indians of 10,000 years ago gathered. Langston Hughes was also aware of the ominous dimension of rivers. Both the Nile and the Mississippi had been used to transport human beings to slavery. Yet the Mississippi was also the river that Lincoln traveled when he personally turned with great revulsion against slavery. And now, in collaboration with the musicians, the poem, The Negro Speaks of Rivers. I've known rivers. I've known rivers ancient as the world and older than the flow of human blood in human veins. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. I bathed in the Euphrates when dawns were young. I built my hut near the Congo, and it lulled me to sleep. I looked upon the Nile and raised the pyramids above it. I heard the singing of the Mississippi when Abe Lincoln went down to New Orleans. And I've seen its muddy bosom turn all golden in the sunset. I've known rivers, ancient, dusky rivers. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. While Langston Hughes commanded respect from and developed friendships with white classmates in his early years and other white people throughout his life, he also, not surprisingly, ran into racial prejudice constantly. At the age of 7, he was not allowed to swim at the local YMCA or join the Boy Scouts. He loved attending movies, and especially of Charlie Chaplin. But one day the woman at the box office told Langston, "Your people can't come here anymore," and pointed to a sign at the window. One of his school teachers took away some licorice from a child in the classroom, saying, "You don't want to eat these. They'll make you black like Langston." Some parents told their children not to play with him. When he was older, he walked into the wrong neighborhood in Chicago and took a broken jaw home as a souvenir. But Langston Hughes did not have the sort of temperament that would lead him to a burst of temper, even when treated unjustly. But he did not capitulate to mistreatment either. An example was at a museum cafeteria where the woman at the register was furious to see him standing in line waiting to pay for his lunch. So she began punching keys on the register until he was billed an astronomical sum. He said he wouldn't pay that amount. He'd pay only what the lunch actually cost. He didn't mirror her anger, but he also didn't pay a penny more than he owed. Then he arrived at Columbia University as a freshman, where he had been admitted. He had been assured not only of his enrollment in 1921, but that he would have housing. But upon arriving, the housing officer told him there were no campus rooms available. Langston said he'd been promised such. The housing official said, "I'm sorry, not possible." So Langston pulled from his pocket a crumpled piece of paper from the university announcing verification of his lodging. There were 12 African American students admitted to Columbia University that year. Langston Hughes was the only one admitted to the dormitories. He was never afraid to call racial hostility for what it was, but when doors were closed to him, he would find another door to open. He worked on a ship alongside the coast of Africa. He worked for Greek farmers in Staten Island. And for someone who never was close to his mother, although he supported her when he began to earn some money, his poem, Mother to Son, I think is beautifully appropriate for Mother's Day and demonstrates that you don't need to have the blessings of a loving parent to know just what one is. This one is one of the best pep talks a parent has given to her child, in my opinion. The poem now, Mother to Son. Well, son, I'll tell you, life for me ain't been no crystal stair. It's had tacks in it and splinters and boards torn up and places with no carpet on the floor, bare. But all the time, I've been climbing on and reaching landings and turning corners and sometimes going in the dark where there ain't been no light. So boy, don't you turn back. Don't you sit down on the steps. 'Cause you find it's kind of hard. And don't you fall now. For I'm still going. I'm still climbing, honey. And life for me ain't been no crystal stair. Langston Hughes did not enjoy Columbia University and dropped out after a year, later got a degree at Lincoln College in Pennsylvania. But as you know, Columbia University is very near Harlem, and Langston Hughes loved Harlem. It was a dream come true. By the 1920s, Harlem was one of the few communities in this country with high-quality housing stock between 125th and 145th Streets, allowed to African Americans. And in James Weldon Johnson's words, people there were able to have better, cleaner, more modern, more airy, more sunny houses than they had ever lived in before. But it was more than just a decent material standard of living that spoke of the Harlem Renaissance. That was in full throttle. His high expectations of Harlem were more than rewarded by coming to know novelists like Walter White and Jessie Fauset, by getting acquainted with Fletcher Henderson and his orchestra, by Bill Bojangles Robinson. And Langston Hughes became the toast of the neighborhood as well. But a particular thrill for him was music, and in particular, further, jazz and blues. He wanted to be known as the jazz poet. And fairly soon, he was commissioned to write a series of articles about the blues for the magazine Vanity Fair. A favorite among favorites was the vocalist Billie Holiday, and in particular, the song he loved the most is God Bless the Child, which we will have the great privilege of hearing in a couple of minutes. First, his poem, The Song for Billie Holiday. What can purge my heart of the song and the sadness? What can purge my heart but the song of the sadness? What can purge my heart of the sadness of the song? Do not speak of sorrow with dust in her hair, or bits of dust in eyes. A chance wind blows there. The sorrow that I speak of is dusted with despair. A voice of muted trumpet, cold brass in warm air, bitter television blurred by sound that shimmers. Where?
It is our spiritual practice to share our offering plate with a deserving social justice recipient. All bills and coins will be shared 50-50 between UUFSB and the social justice recipient, unless you instruct us differently. And if you write a check, you may instruct on the memo line how much is to go to social justice, how much to your pledge. This month's recipient is the Sweetbriar Nature Center, a not-for-profit located in Smithtown. Through education and by example, the Sweetbriar Nature Center encourages appreciation and respect for and responsible decision-making regarding the unique wildlife and ecosystems found here on Long Island. It is located on 54 acres of garden, woodland, field, and wetland habitats on the Nissaquag River. It's home to hundreds of species of plants and animals. The mission of the organization is twofold: to provide natural science education services for people of all ages, and to provide native wildlife rehabilitation services. If you go there, you might see an owl or osprey, a merlin or red-tailed hawk, or other bird or animal which has had medical attention and is recuperating. It's really very cool. You should go. Please support this local organization engaged in caring for our earthly ecosystems.
That's got shall get, them that's not shall lose. For the Bible says it still is news. Your mama may have, your papa he may have, but God bless the child.
Thank you, Claudia. I have heard that song quite a number of times, and I have never heard it more beautifully rendered than just now by you, Claudia Jacobs. And I could have listened to it all day and all night, and I'm confident Langston Hughes would have loved to have heard that too. Langston Hughes never married. To the best of his biographer's knowledge, he never had a lover, as we sometimes use the term. Some have speculated that he was gay. We have no evidence about that matter one way or the other. He kept his sexual proclivities very private. He did participate in the Lincoln Brigade in the Spanish Civil War, which unfortunately was one that fascism triumphed. He was there as a reporter. He met Ernest Hemingway there. He was injured in a minor way in one of the bombing attacks there. He also traveled all over the world. He met Madame Sun Yat-sen in China. He wrote over 40 books, not only poetry, but novels, plays, and nonfiction. And if you ever can look at his autobiography, I Wonder as I Wander, it's as gripping as the best novel. He was called before the Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, led by Senator Joseph McCarthy in 1953, and he handled that challenge very adroitly. In 1956, he read about Rosa Parks famously not giving up her seat on the Montgomery, Alabama bus, and he followed the civil rights movement generally from afar, which he fervently supported, and he deeply admired Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. But he was basically a literary person, not primarily involved in the leadership of social action. He died in 1967 at the age of 64, and I want to conclude with two poems which each were answers to people he admired. The first, entitled Harlem, was arguably the most famous poem that Langston Hughes ever wrote. And even though it preceded Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, it also, in a way, addressed and responded to it. And the other poem, which will be separated by a little pause, was an answer to Walt Whitman, another poet Langston Hughes revered all his life, in response to I Hear America Singing, entitled I Too. First, the poem Harlem. What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun? Or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat? Or crust and sugar like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load. Or does it explode? And now, and in conclusion, the poem I Too, which I think was prophetic, reflected in the more recent movement, Me Too. I Too. I too sing America. I am the darker brother. They send me to eat in the kitchen when company comes. But I laugh and eat well and grow strong. Tomorrow, I'll be at the table when company comes. Nobody will dare say to me, eat in the kitchen. Besides, they'll see how beautiful I am and be ashamed. I too am America.
Let us sing now together the hymn written by brothers James Weldon Johnson and John Rosamond Johnson and dubbed by the NAACP as the African American National Anthem. It was one of Martin Luther King Jr.'s favorite hymns. Number 149, Lift Every Voice and Sing. We will sing just the first 2 verses. Please stand in body or spirit.
stars of faith that goes everywhere. It's like sunshine, has a temple that is all space, has a shrine that is the good heart. It has a creed which is all truth, and which has a ritual which is works of love. Its profession of faith, divine and ethical living. Amen. This benediction is also the words of Langston Hughes, also in our hymnals, 488. Hold fast to dreams, for if dreams die, life is a broken winged bird that cannot fly. Hold fast to dreams, for when dreams go, life is a barren field frozen with snow. Amen. You may know that that final jazz selection, which may be in the order of service, but Maureen pointed out to me, was written by Dan Weymouth. What up? And thank you, Maureen Shaman, for all you did for this service.